game. I went and did the research. GMO is reducing our fertility. GMO is doing it in all the other animals they tested on. They won't let human tests go on because they want to cover this up. All the big eugenicists that call for population reduction are the ones funding it, like Bill Gates buying into Monsanto.
Because that's a lot of opinions and a lot of ideas, but let's talk about the facts for just a moment. I'll get to that. When we look at the Bt toxin causing these pores or openings in the intestines, there's a whole new field among progressive, cutting-edge medical practitioners that are treating or looking at gut permeability. If undigested food gets through these holes into the blood, that might explain the rise in food allergies, autoimmune disease, inflammation, possibly autism. Because gut permeability is one of the factors that scientists are documenting accompany autism in large numbers. So I was giving a talk recently.
But wait, there's also big studies out, just to back you up again, that just came out that they're finding the GMO DNA and RNA is actually going through the blood and into the cells. They'd always said that was impossible, and Monsanto's come out and said it's fine to have our DNA in your cells. So it's actually going through now. I think that's more than just gut permeability. It's that, you know, before we are what we eat, and all this stuff that's slowly developed on this planet, we're able to absorb, and it's part of the normal order. You start splicing and crossing and doing all of this, it shows that at a micro level, we're all interchanging at levels we never knew before.
Let's talk about just this gene transfer, because this is one of the scariest things that is currently documented. The only human feeding study ever published verified that part of the gene inserted into soybeans, making those soybeans Roundup ready, unkillable with Roundup, transferred into the DNA of bacteria living inside our intestines. And that bacteria was unkillable with Roundup. So they had Roundup-ready gut bacteria, suggesting that that gene was functioning. Now, pretend that you're eating genetically engineered Bt corn chips, and the same transfer occurs. What if the gene that produces this toxin that breaks open the stomach of insects and possibly human intestines, what if that gene were to transfer to our own gut bacteria and continue to function? It might turn it may turn our flora into living pesticide factories. Now, one of the studies that came out last year gives support for this. In Canada, they tested the blood of 30 pregnant women and their unborn fetuses, and found in 93% of the pregnant women, the Bt toxin was in their blood, and in the blood of 80% of the cord blood of their unborn fetuses. So what this means is that somehow the Bt toxin is getting into the bloodstream, and this is not supposed to happen according to the EPA. According to the EPA, it's supposed to be destroyed during digestion. So the authors were wondering, how come the frequency is so high? We don't eat that much corn chips and fresh corn to justify that. So they expected that it was eating the meat and dairy from animals that have been fed Monsanto's corn, which was the source of the Bt toxin. But I think it's more likely that it was the transformation of the gut bacteria inside the intestines of North Americans, which is causing this high constant exposure. And when I talk about this to medical conferences where I speak all the time, doctors invariably tell me that the rise in gastrointestinal problems has been astronomical. Irritable bowel syndrome, for example, is up 40% since GMOs were introduced.
It is devastating, and even the early autism work that's now been duplicated over and over again, they tried to discredit the doctors and people that put that out. And of course, there's now a lawsuit against the British Medical Journal journalist who came out and talked about Dr. Wakefield and said that his information was lies. And when you read what they said, well, he did medical stuff that wasn't needed, like a colonoscopy. They say, he's been discredited, it's horrible. And then you read the fine print, he did a colonoscopy on children for you know, things claiming that it was vaccines. Well, we say that's not needed. Well, no, what he found, and now he's learned a bunch of studies before him had found and after had found, is that, and of course he was just looking at the mercury causing problems, but then there's the GMO connected to it, that the guts were highly toxic. And they're like, in the British Medical Journal, they actually say, that's ridiculous. The gut doesn't affect the brain. Really, is that why everybody knows that have farm animals, that the type of food you feed them affects the way they behave? Or that if you drink alcohol or if you take pills, it affects the brain? I mean, this is just asinine. And now, I mean, when I was in high school, there were no autistic children. Now, I take my children to a movie. The first 2 rows or more are autistic children. This is not overdiagnosis. This is a holocaust of children that are brain damaged. And then I talk to the countless families who get the news early enough at 2 or 3, get them off GMO, get them all purified, do all these colon cleanses, do the probiotics, and move to the country and have to hide out to get away from GMO because it's so prolific now. And suddenly their kids start developing and talking, and they can reverse it. And the system gets so angry. And I've seen cases where they send CPS after them, even though their kid gets better, and say, you quit taking them to school. You're homeschooling them now. You quit taking them to their doctor. And they're like, but my child can talk again. I mean, this is like a cult. Listen, keep going through the evidence, but from your view, I know it's eugenics. I know it's a population control. Craziness, the Nazis that came out of eugenics. The system learned you can't use guns and weapons to kill people. They'll fight back. You do it covertly through food, water. They're not going to notice. They're playing God. I know why they're doing it. My question is, how they think they're going to get away with this? Because I see the worm turning against this so fast that there's no way. They've hurt so many people. The word's coming out now. And I'm telling the world, the war criminals are at the big GMO companies and the politicians that did this. And I want the wives and husbands of the politicians. You want to know why the grandson can't talk? You want to know why mommy got cancer at 25? You want to know why you're plagued? You did this to yourselves. And your husband that took money from these people was part of it. And the executives that did this and their engineers are a bunch of eugenicists who are the enemies of humanity. I'm sorry. Go ahead, sir.
Well, for those that don't know much about GMOs, but I'm sure your normal audience does, there are 2 main traits. One is that which produces the insecticide, which we've talked about, and the other is that which withstands high doses of herbicide, and most popular for that is Roundup-ready crops that withstand large doses of Roundup. Now, Roundup has been shown to disrupt reproductive function. It can kill human placental cells, it disrupts estrogen, it causes birth defects, it causes abnormal and lower sperm count.
Being an extremist, come on, weed killer isn't bad for you. Next you're going to tell me rat poison's not good for me either.
One thing that it does is that it kills off beneficial bacteria in the gut of cows, which normally keep botulism bacteria in check. So recent studies have shown that very tiny amounts of Roundup, less than would be residue on the food of these animals, can reduce the controlling bacteria and cause an explosion of botulism within the animal's gut. And I've seen pictures of it, and it's not pretty. So this is another way that Roundup might be causing disaster.